Hello and welcome to this video where we're going to be taking a look at the Cubase 12 content, which is the Verve piano. Typically the content which is included with Cubase has been samples, loops, MIDI data, etc., that kind of thing. But here you're getting a new instrument which will also be available for sale separately if you don't have it with your version of Cubase or you don't have Cubase at all. It plays from inside Halion Sonic SE, which is a free instrument that you can download. There's videos on the channel about Halion Sonic. And it's an addition to things such as Flux and Trip, which we've seen before, and Novel Piano, which was another free piano. This is based around a sampled piano, which was sampled in a studio in the US. It was sampled using a robot, which is an interesting idea because I think that's to give consistency of velocity. It's got 12 sampled velocities per key. It's got 2 mic positions, which you can fade between seamlessly. And it also integrates a textured synth. So there's a sample-based synthesizer, which allows you to add some different textures to that, as well as offering effects and reverb. So with no further ado, let's get into it and take a look and listen. So here we are in Cubase, and as you can see on the right-hand side, I've got Halion Sonic SE ready to go, and on the left-hand side, I've got Supervision in Spectrum Curve mode because we'll take a look at the frequency distribution of what's coming out of the Verve instrument. So as ever, we need to load up the sound, and the easiest way to do it is to just click where it says All Instrument Sets, go to Verve, and then that selects that down. Now we'll look at why you might want to do it a different way in a minute, but first things first, let's load up the first preset which is appearing here, which is Analog String Machine. Now, if we go to the edit, you can see the edit page is quite large, and actually it's a little large for the way I've got my screen capture set up, so things will disappear off the bottom of the screen, but we get this possibly too large user interface set up here. But there we go. So we've got 3 main sections. We've got the piano section, we've got the texture section, and the effects. So first things first, let's have a listen to just the piano on its own. Now to do that, you can just turn off the texture and turn off the effects. And then while we've got these sort of macro controls here, we can just click on the piano page and get an idea of what's happening here. So let's just listen to the basic piano sound from that first one without making any changes. So we hear it's a a fairly nice piano sound. I'm no keyboard player, as anybody who's ever been on my channel will know from my inept piano playing. But we can hear it's clearly a nicely recorded piano. It's been recorded in a reasonable studio from what we've read about it, and we've got some options here. So the distance option here, I think, is probably the most salient one in terms of the sound. So we've got that sound there, and if we go to the other end of the scale, now when I was listening to this the other day on headphones, I got a real big difference with these two here, so I suggest that you listen to this on headphones when you're auditioning it. I'm going to put it back to the midpoint for the time being, and then look at the color control. So if we look at this, I play the same thing twice. Go to 100. We can hear and see what's happened there. You know, we've shifted to the right quite a lot. And then if we move to the left, we're getting a much darker sound. So clearly, playing around with these two here, you'll be able to get the kind of piano sound that you'd expect from this pretty quickly. Compression. So compresses transients, as it says on the tooltip there. And if we go to 100% compression, we can see that if I press gently or I press hard, there's very little difference. I'm going to put the color control back to the midpoint roughly. So with that full compression, no matter how heavy-handed you are, you're not really getting any dynamics, whereas with it back at minus 100, it's accentuating that. So 0 is probably going to give you a performance which shows what you were actually doing, going from gentle to hard. Whereas minus 100, gentle is even more gentle, and hard gets there a lot quicker. So this is changing kind of the curve that you would get on many keyboards. Now, resonance level. So sustain resonance, this is really the sustain control. So if we turn this all the way up, if we've got a sustain pedal set up, then this will show how long this will sustain for. So this is resonance slightly makes you think that it's a filter, and it's not. This is to do with level. So if you have a sustain pedal active, then you will get that kind of effect. So if I play a chord with the sustain pedal on, you can see that there it's hanging around for a long time with that on 100%. And I'll release the sustain pedal now, and down it goes. If I put it to 0, and we do roughly 0, and do the same thing again, so sustain pedal on, you can see it's sustained, but it's fading away more than it would do with it set to 100. And then if I set it to minus 100, so again, sustain pedal on, and that's fading away quicker. So that's giving you control over how the sustain pedal works. So I think the tooltip is more instructive than the original label. Release level here. So again, if I put that to 100 and hit a chord and let go. If I put it to 0, hit a chord and let go. And put it to minus 100. So we're getting some difference in that there. And then we've got these settings below here. So we've got attack noise. So you can turn that attack noise up and hear the difference. This is reasonably subtle. Key noise. And pedal noise. Now, again, this is sustain pedal noise. Certainly a little more subtle than the controls above the line. So next, let's take a look at the texture section. So let's turn the piano off and turn the texture on and have a look at it. So this, in and of itself, is probably worth experimentation, because each preset in Verve is piano and texture combined, as you may have noticed when we played the first analog string machine. So you would hear the piano and then hear these analog strings behind it. So if I just play just a chord again, you can hear that come in. If I hit a little harder. So we've got that, but there are quite a lot of textures to go through. So I'm not going to go through all these, because obviously the video would be a month long. But you can see there's plenty to play with, and they're quite varied. So if we go for electric wire, that's quite different to analog strings, as we heard. Let's go for metal halo. You've got that kind of ring modulated metallic sound in there, etc. So there's plenty to play with. But let's take a look at some of these controls here. So I'm going to flip back to analog strings 1. The first thing is mod wheel. So the mod wheel is set up not as a normal controller where it would add modulation to the sound, but it's the volume control for the texture layer. So if we put this up at 100% and I play, we get nothing because I'm not putting the mod wheel up. But as soon as I put the mod wheel up, I can drive the level of the analog string. So I'm going to hit the chord and then I'm going to push the mod wheel up. So I've hit the chord and now I'm using the mod wheel to control the level of that. So this gives you this nice way of being able to drive the balance between piano and texture, which is pretty nice. I'm going to pop that back down to 0 so it's just on how I play. And then let's look at color. So color, you can see there's some filtering and it's shifting it to one end or the other of the frequency range. So it's filtering. Now variation. See, it says it adds more liveliness. In this case, it's adding some vibrato. That seems to vary depending on the sound that you're using. And then contour. So if we look at the contour control, amount of filtering, so you can see we can make it really severe. And then as we change the color. So that seems much more like a resonance control. Key range is fairly straightforward, but it'll allow you to set up a split where maybe the texture will or won't appear, and that will vary depending on the preset that you're using. And then we've got fairly standard attack. So if we turn this up, it's much longer. So this is attack time, whereas that's instant. And release time, much the same again. So if we turn that up, I'll hit a chord and then release it. So you can take advantage of that. Both these, the piano and the texture, have reverb send, so that's where we're going to move next. I'm going to turn the piano back on and then we'll look at effects. So here we are in the effect section, and as you can imagine, we've got a reverb, but we've also got a delay, and it's a different delay for each section. So you've got one for piano and one for texture. But first, let's look at the reverb. We've got quite a few variations here. So we've got rooms, halls, and special. So these are not knock your socks off kind of spectacular reverbs, but they're quite useful in creating the type of textures I think Verve's going to be used for, because it's going to be for those sort of ambient piano texture kind of thing. So it's useful to have these. So obviously we've got it on large hall at the moment. We can go to bright concert hall. And you get the idea with most of these. But if we go to some of the special ones, so cinematic, again, same kind of thing. Yeah, you're instantly in that kind of thing. You can imagine the SpaceX presentation where they're showing Starship or something like that, that kind of thing. And endless as well, which is quite nice. Particularly if you don't hit a bum note. You can see that hangs on for quite a while, etc. We've got normal stuff in terms of editing. So let's go back to large hall, pre-delay. So we've got up to 500 milliseconds of pre-delay. So you'll hear it here. You can hear the difference between the direct signal and the reverb. We've got reverb time here, which is pretty editable. So let's just put the pre-delay back down and we get. So even on large hall, you know, you can get a not infinite, but functionally nearly infinite reverb out of it, etc. And a pretty standard mix control. So just got the reverb mix, which is really reverb level rather than reverb mix, I think. So if we turn this down, we still get that. So I would have labeled that level rather than mix, but there we go. So it's not a balance control, but there we go. So that's the reverb. Now let's take a look at the delay. So again, with these kind of ambient textured kind of sounds, delays are often useful, and typically you'd probably want to put them in on your channel, but having them as part of the presets can be quite useful because a lot of them have been programmed in an appropriate way. So here we have quite a useful selection, as it happens, of different delays. So we've got from, you know, an analog delay. So let's have a listen to that. To basic echo, which we can change pretty easily. Mundane and workmanlike. Ping pong. You'll appreciate that if you're listening on headphones, etc. Dark repeats. So that's got a bit of filtering in there. You know, very short tape slap, etc. Lo-fi, cross rhythm, wide ping, which is, you know, as you can imagine. Like that, etc. And the everlasting one, which was my favourite of them for this kind of thing. And obviously, if you bring the level up on that and bring the feedback up on that, we can have that you know, ongoing for a significant amount of time. And again, here, it actually is a mixed control, unlike that. So that's slightly strange. Let's just turn that off for a second. So the delay for the texture, exactly the same, but it's nice to have the option to be able to control these and mix them separately. You've got all the standard stuff in terms of sync or delay time, etc. So there's a reasonable amount to play around with, and they're reasonably thoughtfully put together. Finally, there's these macro controls here, so you can control distance control, which is what we've already seen. We've got balance, so that's the balance between the piano and the texture. So we can go full on piano and no texture, or we can go full on texture and no piano. And the color, to a degree, reflects that. So we can see that these pages are themed in terms of their colors, and that's what we get back on there. Variation, again, adds more liveliness to the texture. And finally, the contour control. So the balance hasn't been replicated elsewhere, but these all are. And they are also replicated on the quick controls, which, while they're not visible on screen at the moment because of my screen capture limitations, if we go back to this page, we can see that those are there, and those are set up and ready to use with Cubase's remote controls or whatever you've got set up, however you like to control those. So while we're on this page, one thing which is a nice part of this and has been well thought out, I think, is the chord pads which are available in Halion Sonic. And these are the kind of things I think get forgotten about pretty easily, partly because they're just sort of out of the way, but also because they're slightly awkwardly implemented, I think. But that's by the by. Let's have a look at them. So with each preset, we can see these chords change. So appropriate chords have been chosen, which give us sort of inspirational, song startery kind of chords, etc. So it's not all the same for each one. So we'll see with Bright Sunbeam, we get a different set of chords again. I thought we were heading off into Lionel Richie territory there, but there we go. So you can play around with these, but using them on the user interface isn't so great. So let's take a look at how you can repeatedly use these and control them. So you can audition these presets and play them quickly. So in case you don't know, these chord pads here can be activated by MIDI. So it's pretty easy to set up. So you would right click and then either assign or learn a trigger note. So I'm just going to do learn trigger note and play a note on my controller here. So for instance, that's set for E1. Now the problem with that is that may not be ideal. So I'm actually going to remap my controller so it uses the lowest keys available via MIDI. So I'll do that on screen. I won't talk you through it, but it's a fairly straightforward kind of thing that you can do with most controllers of this ilk. So here I've set them in the MPK Mini editor to be note 0, which is C-1 as far as most people's MIDI implementation is concerned. I'm just going to send that to RAM, so that's sent to my controller. And then let's pop back to Cubase. So now I'm going to relearn this. So learn trigger note and press that particular pad. And we can see now it's a key which is way below. And while Akai and most people would say that was E-1, Steinberg's C, middle C being C3 means that this is E-2. But that's by the by. So now I can play this on my pads. So you can see I'm not playing it on screen. And I could maybe allocate this onto the next pad on my controller. And then this one. And then that. So now I can play. Etc. And start playing around and making songs up, etc. Pretty easy. But the problem is, as soon as you change preset, those allocations for the pads go. That's a pain. So we'll just look at how you can maintain that across multiple programs and not have to repeat doing the same thing over and over again. So the key to this is to map these. So I'm just going to do learn trigger note. In fact, I'm going to do that on all of these. So now I've got all 8 pads on my MPK assigned to this. Bit wacky on Centaur, but never mind. We'll be able to change sounds and still use the pads. The key thing you need to do is to right-click and then pick Save Trigger Notes as Default. So I'm going to try and get that on screen. So you may just be able to see that there, but it's Save Trigger Notes as Default. So that will save those as the default on this particular instance of Halion Sonic. So on another one, it won't be. But then you pick Use Default Trigger Notes. And now when we change to a different patch, you'll see that the assignments are still here and I can still bash away on my keyboard. And you can do that to your heart's content. So that's quite a nice way of doing that. And it means you can experiment much more readily, which really is what all this should be about. So that's Verve. As we've already seen, it's a nicely multi-sample piano with a couple of mic positions and a few controls you can use to alter the tone. If you like the sound you're getting from that, you can turn down the texture and turn off the effects, and you've got a nice piano out of it. Not too bad. But the addition of the 60 plus texture sounds takes it somewhere else. You could use them on their own if there's any of those that you like and just turn the piano down. But the presets and the chord pads, I think, take it to the next level, as people are so fond of saying. And there's quite a few nice sounds in there. With just a bit of a tweak, you can personalize and use them in your production straight away. If you don't get this with your version of Cubase, then it is available separately. Or if you don't use Cubase, you can buy it as well and use it with the free Halion Sonic SE, which is available, say, for free download from Steinberg's site. There'll be a link in the description to that. As ever, if you found this video useful, please like, subscribe, etc. And also watch the other Cubase 12 videos on the channel. But we'll see you again soon for more Music Tech Tuition.